So in a few days' time, we will enter the Vasa here at Santi, so the annual 3-month rains retreat. So at the beginning of the rains retreat, it always seems like it's a very long time. 3 months could last forever. So you have to be very careful when you plan your Vasa. So 12 weeks of meditation. If you get enlightened in the first week, you'll have nothing to do for the rest of the retreat. So take that on board. And then if you don't push yourself a little bit, and you just chill out and spend all your time thinking, oh, I'll do the meditation, tomorrow I'll really get into it, tomorrow I'll start, then you might find that those 3 months actually go past very quickly. So in a way, we need to have a kind of urgency to our practice, but at the same time remain calm, sort of urgent calm, perhaps. So you think you'll survive the 3 months? I mean, it's quite cold physical conditions here at Santi, a lot of wind. You might miss the comforts of home, or you might not be sure that your mind will survive intact. You have to look at it all that time. Perhaps you'll run away. But when I say, if you think you'll survive, what I was thinking about was, do you think you'll be alive at the end of those 3 months? There's a sutta called the Future Perils. And in it, actually, the series of suttas, actually, there's about 4 or 5 suttas, all called Future Perils. And it's kind of like the catastrophist's handbook. It's full of dangers and imagined scenarios. But in the first of these, I think it's 5 suttas, the Buddha says, watch out, there's a lot of perils that could come in the future, things that could happen to you. You could be walking around and then a scorpion bites you or a snake bites you and you die. And that will be very difficult for your practice. I mean, even here at Santi there's snakes, there's funnel webs. So it's not completely unimaginable that this might happen. Or he says, you could be walking around and you stumble and you break your body. Which I was thinking on my way here, it was just getting darker. I better be careful. Or you might get food poisoning, get very sick and die. So luckily the food here is very good, so I don't think that's likely. Or he says you could get attacked by a gang of thugs. Again, not very likely, but things like home invasions do happen out there in the world, so perhaps, maybe. And I do remember reading just recently at a Buddhist temple in Sydney, there was 2 people murdered. So, some sort of organised crime thing going on. So maybe getting attacked by a gang of thugs isn't that far off either. Or he said you could get eaten by wild animals. The cat downstairs, it was meowing a bit, sounds pretty hungry. You know what they say about the cats, they're just little killing machines. Or there could be a particularly rabid kangaroo or wombat, a rampaging wombat that comes. I think people have been killed by wombats before, cyclists especially. So these are some future perils that we could possibly face. There could even be an invading army that comes. Who knows? So in the series of future perils, the Buddha says, contemplate this. This is a reality. And it is a reality. The second rains retreat I ever did at Bodhinyana, Anagarika Craig walked out of his hut one moonlit night, fell over backwards, dead. So it could happen. So stuff's getting real, yeah? This attitude towards death, this desire to look it in the face, is a particularly Buddhist spiritual perspective. It's one of the few religions where you actually consciously practice a death meditation. So it's a very important part of the Buddhist path. This the Buddha asks us constantly to reflect upon death. It's pretty hardcore. Why? I mean, we all know we're going to die, don't we? Or we think we know we're going to die. And yet, we don't really take that on board very much. So we have this kind of abstract concept, but we haven't really internalized that understanding. We haven't allowed it to really penetrate our heart. We haven't come to grips with this fact. This is why the Buddha instructed us to use this special power, he called it. He called it patisankhabala, recollection power, this power of recollection. And he instructed us in so many different ways to use this power of reflection to develop our mind. So there's the famous 5 frequent reflections. Perhaps as Buddhists you might know these. They're things that the Buddha told us to reflect upon frequently, both lay people and monastics. So I'll just go through them very quickly. I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. So this is a fact that we and our culture doesn't like us to look at very much. We're obsessed by youth. Everything you look at on TV is young people, beautiful people, nice, taut, firm bodies. But we're of the nature to age. Our bodies start to fall apart bit by bit. We start to get a little bit stiff in the back. Our knees hurt. We're tired. And our faculties start to diminish. There's only one way that this can go. Can't get younger. No matter how much moisturizer we use, no matter how much yoga we do, we're of the nature to age. We can't avoid it. So this is the first reflection that the Buddha told us to look at frequently, to ponder, to contemplate, reflect upon frequently. And he said, we're of the nature to sicken. Our bodies get sick. So this is something that's quite interesting. Whenever we get sick, it's not our body that's getting sick. This is an aberration. This sickness is something that shouldn't be happening to me, my body. We talk about our body when it's sick as if it's not ours. You know, I'm not well. This body isn't working properly. Something's gone wrong. But this is what happens when you have a body. Bodies are both healthy and sick. Even when you're healthy, there's sickness in your body. And people who have cancer never know that they have that cancer until it's often too late. So even when we feel healthy, our body is actually already sick and unwell. You sit down for meditation, a few minutes in, you start to feel the pain in the back or the pain in the knee. This is a kind of sickness in the body. This is the body saying that, you know, there's suffering here, there's pain here. And it's just the degree to which it's present that we regard it as sickness or health. So this is something that we can't avoid. The body will always get sick. This is the nature of the body. We can't avoid it. You know, we try to wash our hands as frequently as I can. We put little hospital masks on if there's an outbreak in Japan or Korea, you see this. But actually we can't avoid getting sick. It's in the nature of this body to sicken. In the same way, this body's nature is to die. We can't avoid it. It's going to happen. So this is the third reflection that the Buddha asked us to constantly reflect upon. Our bodies will have to finish up. We'll have to let them go. There's nothing that we can do. No one has managed to not die. All the beings that have lived, even the Buddha, had to give up his body. And the fourth frequent reflection is that we must become separated from all that is dear to us. So all those things that we have, our precious things, our comfortable things, just the things of our life, they're very easy to be separated from us. Someone steals your car, you break your phone. These things become separated from you. Let alone things like friends or family who move away, pass on. And in the end, of course, even we have to be separated from all our friends, our family, our status, our possessions when we die. Even this body, which is so precious to us, we'll have to give it up. So this is the fourth fact of life, this fourth frequent recollection the Buddha asks us to ponder. And the fifth is about karma, that we are the inheritors of our karma, the actions that we do, the things that we do. This is what we will get back. Whether good actions or bad actions, we will get this result. So sometimes this might be a difficult thing to see, but we know that if we do something bad, like steal or kill, we get this mental response. We get this sense of regret or remorse. It haunts us. And so we know that we can see, even in this current life, we can see the results of things. If we give to someone a gift and they smile and they're happy, we practice generosity, we see this kind of result of our action. We feel good about ourselves. So we can see it even in this life. And the Buddha says that these things don't just happen in this present existence, but also are carried through to our future lives. So this is the fifth thing the Buddha asks us to think about, is karma. So these five things are actually something that we can ponder in order to develop what's called ujjukaditi. So ujju is straight and ditti is view. So what we're doing when we're pondering like this is called a power, a bala, because we're pondering in order to bring our view into line with reality. So we're trying to straighten our view. It's not quite samaditi, it's not quite right view. That kind of view only happens when your view has been straightened a substantial amount and you have some deep insight into the true nature of reality. So we start with this ujjukaditi, this straightening of our view, by pondering frequently, often reflecting, bringing the mind further and further and further in line with the true nature of our existence. We're going to get old. We get sick. We will die. We will be separated from these things. And we will experience the results of our actions. So these are recollections that we can do. So this is a power, and that's one way that we can develop our mind. Another way that we develop our mind is through meditation. Developing clarity, peace, insight, and wisdom. This is bhavana bala, the power of mental development. So this is another way that we can develop our mind. Both ways we can develop an understanding of the true nature of reality. Both require some effort. Maybe mental development and the cultivation of insight depends more upon the stillness of the mind, the deep samadhi that we experience, whereas the pondering is more of an active thinking mental process. So it's probably something that we can all relate to. We all think in our meditation practice, whether we want to or not, it seems. And so we may as well use it for a good cause. So the Buddha encouraged us to reflect in this way for things like Chāganusati, the recollection of our own generosity, or in things like Maranusati, the recollection of death, or things like the other anusatis, the Buddha anusati, Dhamma anusati, the Sangha anusati. All these themes are very important themes for us to frequently recollect, frequently ponder, so that we keep these aspects of the path in our mind, so that we don't forget them. And when we do this, we bring the mind closer and closer to the things that really matter, the things that are going to transform our practice. But there's another thing that we can practice, something that will shake things up, and this is the concept of Samvega. I don't know if you've heard this term before, Samvega. So Samvega is a kind of cluster of emotions. It's a response to a stimulus. Maybe in Sinhala, this word, it means shock. It could mean awe, A-W-E, when you get awestruck by something. When you are experiencing a spiritual emotion, when you get that feeling of tingling in your skin, where you get that kind of rush of, oh my goodness. You get a moment's insight into nature's true reality, and it's something that transforms our practice. So there's different types of things that cause samvega. So the Buddha said that you can get this positive aspect of samvega from things like contemplating the Buddha. Seeing the Buddha was one way that many people experience this religious, spiritual thrill, an emotional response. He said you could get it from something like seeing the 4 holy places. So the 4 holy places are, of course, the place of the Buddha's birth, the place where the Buddha attained enlightenment, the place where he delivered his first sermon, and the place where he passed away. So these are the 4 holy places. When you go to these places, you get awestruck. You get a rush of tingles up your spine. Oh my gosh, this is where a human discovered the path to enlightenment. Or this is where he gave his first talk and the Dharma was shown to be transmitted to other people. Kondanya, his first disciple, seen the path. And this is where the Sangha was born. So this is an inspiring thing. When you think in this way, oh, my goodness, there's an uplift. There's a sense of, how have I been living? What am I doing with my life? What should I do to improve the conditions and reduce the suffering of my life? So Samvega introduces a sense of urgency into our practice. So this is the kind of positive, happy, joyous side of Samvega. The other side is those more confronting themes. Themes like old age, sickness and death. And of course, these were the things that the Buddha experienced when he went out of the palace for that very first time, when he escaped the cocoon, luxury of the palace environment, and he went out onto the streets with his chariot driver, and there for the first time he saw an old person. He had never seen an old person before. This is the story. And then he saw a sick person, had never seen a sick person before. Then he saw a corpse, had never seen a corpse before. And then, of course, he saw a holy person. So when he saw these things, he experienced samvega. He experienced this spiritual emotion, this awe, this terror, this thrill of life. What is going on? Maybe you felt it yourself, this kind of feeling in your bones. We have some phrases like, oh, someone just walked over my grave. You have this kind of feeling of like, oh, I'm not going to live forever. Or when you understand, oh my gosh, I am fragile. My body is fragile. Like when you have a car crash or something, or you slip over and you think, oh my gosh, I could have fallen over the edge of that cliff. And you're alive, but you had a brush with death, and you feel this, oh, I'm lucky to be alive kind of emotion. So when we think about Samvega, we're thinking about that initial kind of contact with this object that somehow gives us a sense of being awestruck. And then we have this kind of moral aspect of like, how have I been living? What have I been doing with my life? And then we have this third aspect, which is this urgency, this desire to get out of suffering, to transform our experience. So this is Samvega. It's a kind of cluster of feelings, it's a cluster of emotions, and it's a very powerful event that happens to us on the spiritual path. Probably most of you have experienced a taste of this spiritual emotion. Maybe it's something that inspired you to come and live in a monastery, to ordain, to be a meditator, to think about the Dharma, to live a spiritual practice. It's something that shifted you. Maybe it was something like an uncanny experience that happened to you, where you suddenly thought, oh, hang on, what is life all about? And it shifted you, it moved you, it pushed you in a different direction. So perhaps we've had a little taste of Samvega. The Buddha said that when we experience Samvega, we should experience Samvega in relation to those things which are worthy of Samvega. So those things that are awe-inspiring, we should be awe-inspired by. And being inspired by that, we should resolve to change the way that we live in response to that. So it's no good sitting here, doing a death contemplation, saying, oh yes, Bhante, yes, I know it's possible that I could die on this rains retreat, but not really take it on board, not really think, oh, it's not going to happen to me. There's some reactions that will get in the way of us really experiencing this very deeply. First is kind of like just basic denial. We don't want to believe it. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not going to try to make it happen either. I'm not going to go around with a knife or anything like that. We have this idea it's not going to happen to us. Or maybe there's some willful ignorance that's there. This kind of like, we don't want to think about it. We don't want to talk about it. No one wants to hear about death. We don't like it. It's annoying. It confronts us. It's challenging. Or maybe there's a lack of acceptance there. We're not quite ready to take this on board. Perhaps there's some fear. We don't want to think about it. Panics us. Maybe there's some anger that comes up. I don't want to die. I'm not going to die. Why should I? So these things get in the way of allowing this Samvega to arise, this urgency, this desire to live a spiritual life more fully, to really take on those recollections that the Buddha has given us. And he talks specifically actually in one sutta about this. He talks about it through the analogy of a goad. Do you know what a goad is? G-O-A-D. So a goad is, I'll kind of draw it in the air for you. So it's a long stick like that. It's got a very pointy end. And it also usually has a curved hook like that, very sharp. And then on the other side, there's like sometimes a little hook there as well. So it's basically a very sharp, very pointy object. And it was used, and probably still is used all around the world, to train animals. So you use the goad. It's like a more hardcore version of a whip. So you use the goad to prick the animal, to hurt it, so that it will do what you want, right? So he uses this analogy of the goad and a thoroughbred horse. So he says that there's some quick learning thoroughbred horses out there. When they see even the shadow of the goad, they think, okay, what should I do for my master? And the Buddha says there's 4 types of people in this world. I'll go through the rest in a second. The first type of person is like that horse. Just needs a little whiff. Just needs a little shadow to bring up that Samvega. He says it's like when you hear that someone has died in town. That brings up Samvega inside you. Just hearing it is like the shadow. It brings up that spiritual emotion in you, that sense of urgency. How am I living my life? What am I doing? How can I get out of this? Knowing the certainty of death. That shadow of the whip has penetrated that person. They know it. But not all of us are quick learners. Not all horses, unfortunately, are quick learners either. So the second type of thoroughbred is the kind of thoroughbred a bit slower, doesn't get agitated when it sees the shadow of the goad. Instead, only when the goad pierces its skin does it think, oh, okay, I should do what the master wants. And this person, the Buddha says, is like someone who hasn't heard about a death, but has seen a dead body, or has seen someone in pain. So it takes that little bit more to motivate that horse, it takes that little bit more to motivate that person seeing a dead body. Suddenly it's real, isn't it? The third type of person, the third type of horse, is the kind of horse, a little bit slower, again. It needs to be pricked, not just through the skin, but all the way into the flesh. And only then will it start to move in the direction it's meant to be going. And the Buddha says, this is like a person who not only sees a dead body or sees someone in pain, but it's someone they know, a relative or a friend. And this has a deeper impact on them. So this is something that causes them Samvega. Why? Because of their attachment to that person. And it's kind of true about us, isn't it? We see images maybe in movies or on the television or in newspapers of dead bodies washed up in certain parts of the world from a tsunami, or lying in certain Middle Eastern countries, faraway lands, and it means nothing to us. We don't get that shadow of the whip. We don't even get that skin prick. We're numb to it, desensitized. But when it's our family, our friends, then we're concerned. Then we're worried. Then we get this glimpse. Oh, this is real. This is happening. So it takes that little bit more to get through to this kind of person. The fourth type of person, who's like a thoroughbred, is the kind of person, the kind of horse, who doesn't just move from the shadow, doesn't move from the skin prick, doesn't move from the flesh being pierced, but needs that goad to go all the way down into the bone. It's a pretty stubborn horse, yeah? But this is like us. So this person doesn't just need to hear about death or suffering, doesn't see it in other people, doesn't get motivated when it's someone close to them, only when it's them, only when it's us, when it's happening to us, when we're sick, when we're in pain, when we're dying, only then does it suddenly seem real to us. We're like that stubborn horse. And why? Why is it so difficult for us to apprehend this? I mentioned a few things before. Fear, denial, ignorance. The real reason is that we've become attached to a certain type of view. We have this idea that I am permanent, this is my body, that this is stable. Sure, it goes through some changes, but essentially it's here and it's going to be around, I'm going to be around for as long as the world lasts. It's very difficult for us to understand our impermanence. It's very hard for us to see. So it's because we've become attached to a type of view about ourself, that we're a stable, permanent entity. And there's a lot of stories actually in the suttas about this. I'm just thinking now of the Cūḷataṇhāsaṅkhaya Sutta in Majjhima Nikāya number 37. And this is a wonderful conversation between Moggallana, one of the Buddha's chief disciples, and the king of the gods, Sakka. So the king of the gods was visiting the Buddha. This is a story. So the king of the gods was visiting the Buddha, and the Buddha was giving him a teaching. Moggallana was sitting off to the side, and the Buddha was teaching about craving, about desire, about attachment. And the Sakka was nodding his head, saying, yes, yes, Bhante, yes, very good, very good. And then he took his leave and went back up to the heavens. And Moggallana thought to himself, I don't know about that God. I don't know that he was actually paying attention. I don't know that he actually was listening or comprehending what the Buddha was teaching. So maybe this is a little bit like us sometimes. We go and we listen to a talk, we say sadhu, 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 and then we go away, we forget it all. Someone asks you tomorrow, what was last night's Dharma talk about? Anyway, so up he goes to heaven, Sakka, followed close behind by Moggallana. And Moggallana says to him, so, what did the Buddha teach you? And Sakka's like, well, I'm actually very busy now. I've got lots of things to do. I'm very busy. I'm very important. I'm the king of the gods. And Moggallana says, okay, right, okay. Well, what did he teach you? Well, actually, I can't remember. And Moggallana thinks, great. So we ask him again, what did the Buddha teach you? And Moggallana says, Sakka says, look at this palace. Isn't this a beautiful palace? We built this palace. Isn't it lovely? Trying to distract Moggallana from his line of inquiry, trying to distract him with this big, beautiful building. And Moggallana says, oh, yes, it's very lovely. And Sakka says, oh, have a look in this room. There's treasure there. There's this beautiful thing. There's that beautiful thing. And Moggallana's thinking, he clearly wasn't paying any attention at all. The Buddha was talking to him about craving and attachment. And here he is, craving and attaching to all of his possessions, this beautiful building. And so he says to him, oh yes, it looks like the kind of stuff you would get from accumulating good merit in your past life. So this is Moggallana's attempt at a hint. If you had a past life, maybe this life won't last forever either. But Sakka, the king of the gods, doesn't get it. And so he keeps on going on saying, oh, there's these beautiful maidens over here. And Moggallana says, this God needs to be shaken up. This God needs some attention put on Samvega. And so he takes his big toe and he kicks the palace. And he uses his psychic powers to make this whole palace shake and tremble with this earthquake. And then, only then, as these things are starting to fall apart, only then does Sakka, the king of the gods, say, oh my goodness. And he realizes he is impermanent too. And then Moggallana, moving in for the kill, says, so what did the Buddha talk to you about? And the Sakka says, he talked about craving and attachment. And he repeats the story in exact detail back to Moggallana. And so this is a story of how easy it is to form a view. For gods, their life will last thousands and thousands and thousands of eons. So for them, they become very attached to this idea of their permanence. It's very difficult for them to see their impermanence. This is just basically like us, right? You don't have to be a god to think that you're going to live for a long time. I mean, we all think we're going to live and die peacefully in our sleep in our old age, but we know that's not always the way it happens, and yet we're attached to this view, right? We truly believe this is how it's going to go down for us, peacefully, without pain, in our sleep. Kind of like wishful thinking. So this is the power of Samvega. This is what the Buddha used these types of stories to inspire. There's another good story which I'll just talk about briefly, which is when the Buddha compared himself to a lion. So it's the Sīha Sutta, one of the many lion suttas in the Nikayas. And the Buddha says, when a lion roars, this is the Buddha using an analogy, when the lion roars, all of the animals run away. They're so scared, they're in awe, that word Samvega, they're in awe and fearful of the lion's roar. Even, he said, bull elephants, big, huge elephants, get scared. He said they wet their pants and they poo on the floor. This is how scared they are of the lion's roar. And he said, talking about himself, when the Buddha gives a discourse to the gods, they are scared. I don't think they wet or poo their pants because they're fine material beings. But they get that kind of response of Samvega because suddenly they're being taught that their life is impermanent. And so for them there's this fear, this Samvega, this awe, this terror at the impermanence of their existence. And so this is how the Buddha says his teaching affects people. Suddenly we have to really confront the true nature of our reality. There's many other suttas where the Buddha gives beautiful similes, beautiful illustrations of impermanence. Things like Araka's teaching in the Anguttara Sevens, this beautiful image of a dewdrop on a blade of grass. Beautiful, yeah? So lovely. But it doesn't seem to have the power behind it of other images, does it? And then we see in all Buddhist calendars, covers of books, magazines, this beautiful image of this lotus with a dewdrop. And we get entranced by this beauty. Oh, isn't that a lovely thing? That means Buddhism. That's what Buddhism is, this beautiful impermanence. But we don't see that impermanence is actually going to be us. We don't see it. We don't understand that this is not a beautiful image. This is a terrifying image. That dewdrop dries up so quickly. Our rains retreat will go so quickly. Our life will go so quickly. What are we going to do about it? So we're attached to this view that we have of ourself, our permanence. So how do we get over these kinds of views? How do we get over this view of self? So there's that power of mental development, meditation where we develop mind states that are very clear, very still, very powerful. And then we have the clarity of mind to see insights into the true nature of anicca, anatta, dukkha. Even if we don't get to those very high stages of the path where we can make those realizations very profound, we can still experience these in this body, in this mind, in our daily practice. Or we can use those pondering, that power of pondering, that patisankabala, to keep on straightening our view, to keep on creating that ujjhakaditti that leads to the samadhitti. But in order to do that, we need to be able to relinquish our views. We need to be able to understand when we should let go of our views. And this is very difficult to do. This view of a stable, permanent self is very fixed. We've been doing this a long time. It's very difficult to let go of this view. It's very hard. Even if you think about other types of views out there, just mental views, like things like the Flat Earth Society. You know, these people who have developed a viewpoint that despite all this scientific evidence, despite experiments, despite, you know, all of the facts to the contrary, are unable to give up their views. And this is just the thing about the nature of the world. But, you know, this is just the nature of us, this viewpoint that we have on ourselves. There's another wonderful sutta called the Pāyāsi Sutta in the Digha Nikaya number 23, where there's a conversation, a wonderful conversation, if you ever get a chance to read it, between Pāyāsi, who is a chieftain. So not a king, kind of like a tribal chief, and a wonderful monk named Kassapa the prince, Kumara Kassapa the prince. And he and this chieftain are having this wonderful discussion because the chieftain has this, what we call in Buddhism, a wrong view about the nature of reality. So he believes that there is no such thing as life after death. He believes that there is no such thing as karma. And so Kassapa the prince is trying to have this conversation with him, saying, look, you know, you should come out of this view. It's very harmful for you, very harmful for others. But Pāyāsi, the chieftain, he is a pretty good debater. So it's a very long sutta, and there's lots of things where Pāyāsi is saying, oh, no, I've been thinking about this a long time, and I've tried lots of different methods to find out if there's life after death, or if there's such a thing as karma. We've had my men hold a man down and cut him open to see if we could see his soul escaping. But we didn't see a soul escape, so there's no such thing as a soul, there's no such thing as rebirth. Or he says, I've asked people who are sick and going to die to come back and tell me about the afterlife. But no one's ever come back and told me. So there's no such thing as the afterlife. And of course, Kassapa the prince is engaging him in debate and is challenging all of these things. And there's this back and forth and back and forth. And eventually it gets to this stage where Pāyāsi is starting to be convinced about the arguments that Kassapa is making. And yet he says he's unwilling to give up his view out of anger, out of spite. He's not going to relinquish that view. He's so determined to hold on to it. He's absolutely, categorically not going to give it up. And Kassapa uses a simile to describe this. He says, imagine that there was a pile of dried dung. And a swineherd comes along and sees this dried pile of dung and thinks, oh, actually, that would make very good food for my pigs. And so he takes off his robe and he puts the dung into the robe, he ties it in a bundle, and he places the bundle on his head, and he starts to walk home, very proud of himself. He's just found this wonderful source of food for his pigs. And then it starts to rain. So he's got this bundle of dung on his head. It starts to rain, and of course the rain makes that bundle of dung, which was dry, very wet, quite sloppy, and it's very messy. So there he is, carrying this bundle of wet dung now on his head, and it's dripping down his face, dripping down onto his hands. And people, of course, are like, what are you doing? Have you gone mad? What are you doing? Put it down. Put down that bundle. And he's like, no way. Are you crazy? I'm not crazy. You're crazy. This is great food for my pigs. But he hasn't realized that the situation has changed. That it's no longer a good find. He's literally covered in wet dung. And so this is the image that Kassapa uses to try to convince him, saying, put that view down. Let go of that view. It's not a good look for you. But of course Pāyāsi, he's like, no, I'm not going to give up this view, no way. And then, so Kassapa gives an even further analogy later on in the sutta, and he says, it's like there were two scavengers, two types of people, two scavengers who are friends, and they're out there scavenging around, and they come to this abandoned village, and they find a pile of hemp, not, I don't think, like for smoking purposes, but the kind of hemp that you might use to make cloth. So they find this hemp, and they're like, yes, wonderful. And so they bundle it up. One puts one bundle on his shoulder, the other puts another bundle on his shoulder, and they go walking around the village. And then they spy on the ground, abandoned, this pile of hemp thread. So where do you get hemp thread from? From hemp, raw hemp. And they think, well, one of them says, well, this is what we're going to do with that, so why don't we just take the thread instead? Why don't we put down our bundles and take up the thread? And the other guy says, oh, no, I've been carrying this bundle a long way. I'm not going to put it down now. He's invested in it, yeah? Just like the guy with the dung. So the other one puts down his bundle of hemp, picks up the cotton thread, and they go walking, seeing what else they can find. And then they find some cloth, hemp cloth. And so this guy thinks, well, hang on, that's what we're going to use the thread for, so why don't I just pick up the cloth? So he picks up the cloth and he says to his friend, why don't you put your bundle down? And he's like, no, I've been carrying this bundle a long way. I'm not going to put it down now. And so this story goes on and on and on. Many permutations. They find some silk thread, then they find some silk fabric, and then they find some tin, then they find some iron, and then they find some silver. And all the while, this guy has refused to put down his bundle. No, he's very attached to this bundle. Can't let go of this bundle. And his friend says, now we've found gold. Why don't you put down your bundle? No, I'm very attached to it. Been carrying it a long way. So the other guy picks up the gold and they go back to their village. And of course, the guy who brought the gold back is received very well by his family, and he experiences a lot of pleasure. He makes everyone happy. And the other guy with this bundle of hemp, his family's like, what? Why did you bring this back? And he experiences a lot of displeasure, doesn't have a good time at all. And so when it comes to us, when it comes to our spiritual practice, we have to be ready and willing to relinquish some of our views. Some of those things that we thought we understood, some of those things that we've been carrying a long time, we have to be ready to let them go. To let go of that less valuable view and take up something more precious, more valuable, that's going to be of better use for us on the spiritual path. So we give up a lesser happiness for a greater happiness. And one of these is this view that we have of our body, of our permanence, of our identity. And so Samvega, stirring things up, shaking things up. Of course, we've got to be careful with this kind of concept that we don't become overly agitated, overly urgent, overly frenzied, or even distraught by these concepts, these difficult themes. In the suttas, especially in the Therigatha, actually, you see things like the elder monks and nuns talking about Samvega, experiencing Samvega, and they say, I felt Samvega, and then I felt calm. So they experienced that religious, spiritual emotion, that terror, that inspiration, whatever it was, but then they felt calm. And why? Why would they feel calm? It always seems to go hand in hand. And maybe the answer is that when we see something clearly, when we understand it, we at least are naming it, seeing it, taking away the fear, taking away any resistance that we have to it. And we have this inspiration, this momentum. Samvega is related to virya, energy, is something that's going to propel us further on the path. So when you know where you're going, when you feel confident that you're on the right path, then you can relax a bit, yeah? Then you experience this calm. So we have this Samvega, and then we have this Santa, calm. Santi, this place here. Santi, calm. And Thanissaro, when he talks about Samvega, he says that it's good to develop Pasada. Pasada is clarity, a sense of serenity. And so it's useful when we're contemplating these things to allow it to lead to peace, allow it to lead to a sense of serenity, not to be too troubled by it, use the energy of that inspiration, but don't remain agitated or distraught or anything. Instead, go towards the peace, because that's where you're going to be able to do the work that has been inspired by that religious, spiritual emotion of Samvega. And maybe you've experienced this yourself whenever you've done a death contemplation. Maybe you've experienced, a lot of people say, when they do this death contemplation, they experience a sense of peace, a sense of calm. And it just comes from familiarizing our mind with the true nature of reality, straightening our view. And so in terms of urgent calm and shaking things up, the Buddha says we've got 3 urgent duties to do as people on the spiritual path. In this sutta, in the Anguttara 3, he was talking to monastics. So he was saying monastics have 3 urgent duties on the spiritual path. The first, and he compared them, the last simile, and then we'll finish up. He compared it to a farm. and us to farmers. So he said, there's 3 urgent things that a farmer has to do, that monastics have to do. So the first urgent thing that we have to do is to till the earth, plough the earth, prepare the earth. And so this is what a farmer has to do, yeah? The next thing the farmer has to do is to plant the seed in the right season, at the right time. This is what the farmer needs to do. The third thing the farmer needs to do is to provide water, irrigate it, so that the seed can grow. So this is the analogy of the farmer's urgent duties. But he says, even doing this, the farmer cannot speed up any of this process. He cannot say, oh, that seed should germinate now. Oh, that crop should be ready now. Can't control it. It develops naturally, all by itself, when the conditions are in place, when there's good earth, when there's the presence of a seed, when there's ample water to grow. In the same way, he said that monastics or people like you on the spiritual path, we have 3 urgent duties of our own. We need to prepare our soil by cultivating the higher training in ethics, Adi Sila Sikha. We need to develop Adi Sila, this good, strong, moral, ethical framework in our lives. So we avoid bad actions, we cultivate good actions, we prepare the mind so that there's no regret or remorse in the mind, so that there's no anger, there's no difficult experiences that we produce within our own mind, caused by our actions. This is Adi Sila Sikha, the training in higher moral virtue. So this is preparing the earth, and then we can plant the seed, and that is the seed of developing our mind. This is Adi Chitta Sikha, the training in higher mind. And this is things like our meditation practice. When we develop our mind in this way, that seed is planted. When we reflect, when we ponder, that seed is planted. So this is our urgent task as people on the spiritual path, to keep planting seeds in our minds. Mental development. And then the third urgent task that we have is to flood that field so that that seed can grow. And this is the training in higher wisdom, Adi Panya Sikha. So Panya is wisdom. This is discernment. This is knowing what is right, what is wrong. This is seeing in accordance with reality. This is seeing anicca, anatta, dukkha. So preparing the mind with good ethics, planting the seed with meditation, reflection, and then you get the results. And then we flood it with this wisdom from good teachers, from reading the suttas, from our own experience, and then we'll get the results. But we can't force it. We can't rush it. We can't make it happen. We can't say, may I get enlightened in the first week of the rains. Only when the causes and conditions are there can we have the benefit of our practice. So our job is not to try to force anything or wish that we had good meditation or jhanas or wish that we had finished the path or were a stream enterer. We can't force any of those things. This is dharmata. This is according to nature. It has to happen according to nature. We cannot force it. It has to happen only in response to the natural course of things. And the causes and conditions have to be in place. That's where we put our urgent effort. That's where we do the work. The rest will happen by itself. And so just to finish up, this is that urgent sense of calm that we need to develop in our practice. We have this kind of balancing act, neither too slack nor too tense. And this is how we can have a good meditation retreat. And I offer these words to you on Samvega, shaking things up, hoping that they may be of some benefit to you, and hope that they bring many fruits to your practice.
Sa